growing scandal involving Prince Harry and his last remaining genuine charity project, the Invictus Games. But is it really a charity project at all? This is the very reason why everyone who originally worked on and set up Invictus no longer works.
Yes, government funds are supposed to cover about half, but the other half are supposed to come from private companies and private individuals, and nobody's dropping a dime anymore because they are also saying, how come this costs so much money?
Here's a sentence Boeing put out in 2023, cleared by lawyers, signed off by corporate communications, and sent out on official company letterhead. Long-term partnership. That's what Boeing called its deal with the Invictus Games. Not we're testing the waters. Not let's see how Vancouver goes. Long-term. The kind of language a defense and aerospace giant only puts in writing when they mean it, because their legal team won't let them say it otherwise. Then, in May 2026, Boeing confirmed it won't be sponsoring the next Invictus Games in Birmingham. One edition. That's what long-term turned out to mean. One single edition. Now, every other video has Harry's face on the thumbnail, Harry's name in the title, Harry taking the $63 million Invictus scandal on the chin. But here's the question nobody's actually asking.
We are witnessing the collapse of the Harry and Meghan project in real time.
Vancouver had Boeing and ATCO as co-presenting sponsors and over 44 corporate partners. Birmingham right now, 11. 11 unnamed sponsors, contributing a combined £4 million against a projected cost of £45 million. That's not a shortfall, that's a collapse. Something happened between Vancouver and Birmingham that made 43 corporate partners vanish. This video shows you exactly what that something was, who created it, and why the one name you keep hearing, Meghan, is the answer Boeing's risk department already landed on before anyone else was even paying attention. By the time we get to what working event professionals, people who get paid to build these things, are privately saying when Invictus calls them about a job, you'll understand the scale of brand damage we're really dealing with. Because they're not just pulling the money, they're not just walking away from the sponsorship.
Palace officials feel that Harry and Meghan are toxic and they would ruin the spectacle.
They're turning down the paychecks. So why now? Why this week? Because Tom Bower just dropped his second book on them, and if revenge was the opening argument, betrayal is the evidence. His first book made the case. This one brings the receipts. Bower doesn't do opinion. His track record reads like a list of powerful people who tried to stop him and failed. Robert Maxwell bought up the publishing rights to block the paperback edition. Mohammed Al-Fayed dismissed his reporting for years, right up until a BBC documentary confirmed everything. Tony Blair, Boris Johnson, Jeremy Corbyn, Conrad Black, Richard Branson, Bernie Ecclestone, Simon Cowell, 24 best-selling books. The subjects attack him. The truth eventually confirms him. Every single time history sides with Bower, and the Sussexes know that pattern. Which is exactly why, when betrayal landed, they did something they almost never do anymore. They responded immediately. A spokesperson fired out a statement calling it a deranged conspiracy and melodrama. Swift, blistering, unsolicited. They've ignored hundreds of negative stories without saying a single word. This one got a statement within 24 hours. Want to know which claims hit close to the bone? Watch which ones get a response.
The Invictus Games has suffered its greatest blow yet, and that is the decision by Australia to remove all funding from their team.
The ones that don't land? Silence. This one? A blistering rebuttal. Connect those dots yourself. This isn't just embarrassing, this is a contractual, financial, and reputational crisis playing out in real time, in government funding documents, in corporate sponsorship announcements, in the private hiring decisions of event professionals who are choosing with their own careers on the line that Invictus isn't worth the association. That's not sentiment, that's a market verdict, and Boeing just delivered it officially. 5 exhibits. Follow the sequence, because the sequence is the story. Exhibit 1. What long-term actually meant. In 2023, Boeing announced a long-term partnership with the Invictus Games Foundation as co-presenting sponsor for Vancouver. Not a trial run, not a one-off. long-term. Their legal team signed off on those words. Boeing is a defense and aerospace corporation. They build military aircraft. Boeing has active government contracts across NATO countries. Their entire corporate identity is built on military relationships.
When Meghan came along into the scene, I just thought, this is fascinating. How is this going to play out? To tell the truth, I spoke to very few friends of Meghan because she put a fatwa on anyone talking to me who she could. So I sent off dozens and dozens of emails to her friends, and most of them didn't even reply.
Backing a veteran athletic competition wasn't charity for them, it was brand strategy. Being seen supporting wounded service members matters when you're literally selling planes to those same governments. So when Boeing said long term, they meant it. Then they looked at Birmingham and walked away without a single word. No official reason, no public explanation, just no. A company with active UK military contracts, one that had publicly committed to the long-term future of a veteran foundation, looked at the next edition and decided the association was no longer worth keeping. Vancouver had 44 corporate partners. Birmingham has 11. That math doesn't happen by accident. It doesn't happen because of a postcode. It happens when a brand has been damaged badly enough that the cost-benefit calculation comes back negative in boardrooms across multiple countries, and walking away becomes the cleaner option. But the damage didn't come from nowhere. There's a specific, documented moment where the brand started turning, and that moment has Meghan's name written all over it. Which brings us to Exhibit 2, the Instagram post and the private plane. Tom Bower's betrayal contains a passage the Sussexes specifically responded to, which tells you immediately it hit somewhere real. Bower documents how Meghan approached the Vancouver Games. His framing, reported across multiple publications from the book serialization in The Times, goes like this. Meghan needed a global stage for genuine admiration and cheering fans.
The public's taxes footed a portion of the bill. According to tax returns on file, the public picked up half the tab for Vancouver, with the Canadian federal government contributing $15 million through the Veterans Affairs Canada, and the province of British Columbia contributing another $15 million through its Ministry of Tourism, Arts and Sport. The remaining funds came from approximately 40 corporate partners and about $2.6 million in individual donations. Crucially, that public money didn't flow directly to the Games.
Harry agreed she could open the Games, and just before heading to Vancouver on a private plane, she notified her Instagram followers. Read that one more time. A private plane, an Instagram notification, a veteran athletic competition built to celebrate wounded service members being used as a content drop, a veteran Games, or a brand moment, starting to look like both. Then look at what Bower also documents about the internal reaction. 2 Canadian executives who had been running the Games on the ground professionals, not commentators, had grown to resent what they called the pushy Sussexes. They raised specific concerns about direction and resource allocation. They pushed back professionally. And their 3-word verdict on Meghan's role in the entire operation on the record, in a published book, was this: she's bling, not rehabilitation. Not a tabloid headline, not an anonymous social media post, a professional assessment from the people actually responsible for delivering the event to real veterans, and it didn't come from personal dislike. It came from watching what the event was being turned into, right in front of them. Bower also documents that Dominic Reed, the actual head of the Invictus Foundation itself, was worried about the Games being seen as what he called
Invictus Games was supported with Palace funding via the Royal Foundation, Palace staff, Palace logistics and Palace diplomatic access. It was a full-scale institutional project designed to rehabilitate wounded veterans.
The Harry and Meghan Show, the head of the foundation. Concerned that the couple's prominence was overshadowing the competitors, the very people the whole thing was supposed to be about. That's not an outside critic taking shots. That's the man running the organization from the inside, and his concern is on the record. His concern is now measurably reflected in the 43 sponsors who showed up to Vancouver and didn't show up to Birmingham. Not a coincidence. Which brings us to Exhibit 3, the executives who told the truth and lost their jobs. Those 2 Canadian executives who said, she's bling, not rehabilitation, didn't go to the press. They didn't leak to a tabloid. They raised their concerns internally, professionally, through the proper channels. They said what they saw, and they were removed, replaced. New leadership was brought in. Leadership that apparently had no such concerns about the direction things were heading. Bauer documents that Nick Booth was brought into the chief executive position following the departure of those two executives. The people who raised the alarm got shown the door. The people who stayed quiet inherited an organization that Boeing then walked away from. The alarm was raised. The people raising it were replaced. The alarm was correct. So let's be clear about what that sequence actually means. Concerns were raised internally. Those concerns were dismissed. The people raising them were replaced. The event then moved forward with the private plane, the Instagram notification, the 5-star hotels, and the excessive spending that Bauer alleges in the same book. And now there are 43 fewer corporate partners, a vice chairman who resigned without a word, and a defense contractor that called itself a long-term partner and left after one edition.
The royal biographer, this is Jack Royston Special, he wrote this, who famously called her a brave and hussy, attended the Invictus Games, with one account saying, "Somebody call the police." He was in the author. He was in the audience. The author was in the audience because he's allowed to be, Sue, right? He's a public citizen, and
That's a straight line from the dismissed alarm to the empty sponsor board. And if you think Boeing walking is the full extent of the damage, wait until the financial fallout coming in about 5 minutes, because the same exit pattern Boeing ran was run simultaneously by a $100 million streaming giant. And this one involves, and this is the actual reported phrase, truckloads of unsold product being handed out to employees, because there was nowhere else for it to go. Exhibit 4, the Netflix expansion that lasted 7 months. In August 2025, Netflix announced it was expanding its deal with the Sussexes, and not just the production deal. They specifically pulled Meghan's lifestyle brand, As Ever, deeper into the partnership, a larger product line, more Netflix backing, more integration, the whole thing packaged as an extended creative partnership. 7 months later, Netflix withdrew as an equity investor from As Ever and walked out. 7 months, expanded in August, gone by March. The explanation from inside Netflix, reported by Us Weekly with a named source on record, was that Netflix cut ties because the show was not performing well. That's the diplomatic version. The less diplomatic version is what they actually did with the leftover product when the show ended. They gave away truckloads of her product to Netflix employees, not returned to stock, not liquidated through retail, handed out internally because there was no commercial outlet left for it, truckloads of unsold jam.
Does a charity for wounded heroes transform into a $63 million PR vehicle? And have Prince Harry and Meghan Markle dragged Invictus Games down with them?
In this case, we're not dealing with the smartest person in the world. We know that from all the things we've seen. Seriously, she's not. Yeah. You know, she's nice and she's smart. I mean, fairly.
Let that land. Now the numbers, because the numbers are bleaker than the language. Meghan's show, With Love, Meghan, the series Netflix built As Ever around. The series, they expanded the deal to support, ranked 383rd out of more than 7,000 titles on Netflix's own internal engagement report for the first half of 2025. Season 2 didn't crack the global top 10 in its debut week. A streaming giant with a reported $100 million deal was distributing unsold lifestyle product to its own staff by early 2026. $100 million. Truckloads of jam. Same story. But here's the exhibit that ties everything together, and it's the one nobody in this space has built a full segment around yet. Because the most devastating verdict on the Invictus brand didn't come from Boeing's exit announcement. It didn't come from Netflix's truckload distribution. It came from the people who never showed up at all. Exhibit 5, the professionals who turned down the job. When the Birmingham 2027 organizing team started hiring, something unusual started happening. Qualified candidates, event professionals with exactly the skills needed to run an operation this size were offered positions, and they declined. Not because of the salary, not because of the location. They turned down paying work after finding out it was Invictus, citing the organization's reputation. Sit with that one for a second. A Boeing exit is a financial calculation made in a boardroom. A Netflix pullout is a viewing data calculation made by a streaming algorithm. But an event professional turning down a paying job because they don't want their name attached to a project, that's a career calculation. That's someone looking at their professional reputation, looking at the industry relationships they've spent years building, and deciding the Invictus brand is now a liability to their own standing. These aren't critics. These aren't royal commentators with opinions and nothing at stake. These are working professionals in the events industry, the people who actually know how to build things at this scale, and they don't want to build this one. Career-limiting move. Association only. That's their verdict. That's not a problem you solve with a government press release. That's not a gap you close with a new marketing campaign. That's the industry's collective private judgment on what this brand has become delivered quietly, professionally, without a single press release. Which is exactly why it carries more weight than any public statement ever could. Now let's slow down, because underneath the numbers and the sponsor charts, there are real people. And the people are where the truth becomes undeniable. Melanie Pool. She's not a face you'll have seen on a tabloid cover. She's not a royal commentator with a hot take. Melanie Pool is a distinguished legal expert whose career spans senior roles at the Heritage Lottery Fund and the National Lottery Charities Board. She established the Armed Forces Covenant Fund in 2015, the actual legal mechanism that commits institutions to supporting armed forces communities. She earned an OBE in 2011. She currently chairs the Florence Nightingale Foundation, the nursing charity named after the woman who revolutionized care for wounded soldiers. She was the vice chairman of the Board of Trustees for Invictus Games, Birmingham 2027, and then she resigned. Quietly, without explanation. The same week Boeing's exit was confirmed, a woman who built her entire career protecting public funds, serving the armed forces community, and working in governance, her whole professional identity centered on veterans and institutional accountability, looked at what was happening at the Invictus table, and decided that leaving was the right call. She said nothing publicly. Not a single word. Think about what it takes to walk away from something like that without a statement. She didn't explain. She didn't criticize. She simply concluded privately that her name and this organization were no longer compatible, and she went back to the Florence Nightingale Foundation. That silence from a woman who has spent 30 years being professionally vocal about veterans' welfare is the most devastating quiet exit in this entire story. Because people with her credentials don't leave without a reason, and the reason doesn't have to be spoken to be understood. Then there are the two Canadian executives. They weren't silent. They said exactly what they saw directly, professionally, through proper internal channels. That Meghan was a distraction from the veterans, that the Games had lost its purpose, that the event was becoming something it was never built to be. They didn't go to the press. They raised it internally, and for that, they were replaced. Those men watched a veteran charity they had committed to building get redirected in their own professional assessment away from rehabilitation and toward a celebrity's Instagram content strategy. They said so. They paid for it. And the thing they warned about is now sitting in the public record for every corporate risk department in the industry to read. They were right. And it cost them. Here's where the money gets real. Here's what the finance directors and the lawyers see when they look at Birmingham 2027. The UK government has committed £26 million to the Games. Public money. Taxpayer money committed via the Office for Veterans Affairs to a city that formally declared bankruptcy in September 2023 after disclosing an £87 million budget deficit and a £760 million equal pay liability. Birmingham only exited formal bankruptcy in February 2026, 3 months before the Invictus funding crisis went public. That's the host city, recently bankrupt. Now hosting a veteran sports event with a projected cost of between £30 and £60 million, £45 million as the working midpoint, against £26 million in government money and £4 million from 11 unnamed sponsors. That's a £15 million gap at minimum. Now here's the legal exposure nobody is talking about. Government funding commitments to public events come with conditions attached, transparency requirements, delivery benchmarks, milestones that have to be hit before the next tranche of money is released. An organizing team that can't fill key roles because qualified professionals are turning down the work is a team that may seriously struggle to hit those benchmarks on schedule. And look at the Boeing angle from a corporate liability perspective. A publicly stated long-term commitment followed by an unexplained exit before the next edition. No public reason given. What exactly did Boeing's risk department see in 2026 that it didn't see in 2023? The budget exposure figures were public. The Bauer allegations were public. The cost per veteran, $118,000 per competitor, was public. The US Warrior Games running on $2 million a year was public. Boeing's compliance team runs due diligence. They made a calculated decision that the reputational cost of staying outweighed the reputational benefit. They saw the numbers. They left. And here's why finding a replacement isn't just difficult. It's functionally impossible without a fundamental structural change. The companies that write checks at this level for a veteran athletic competition are, almost without exception, companies that need military credibility. Defense contractors, aerospace firms, government-adjacent corporations. These are the companies that benefit from the association, and these are exactly the companies now reading the Bauer allegations about private jets and five-star hotels, studying Rachel Maxwell's cost per veteran calculations, and running their own internal risk assessments before agreeing to put their name next to this one. Any replacement for Boeing has to justify that $118,000 per competitor figure to their own board. It's public, it's searchable, it isn't going away. And that means the replacement category doesn't just have a gap, it has a reputational ceiling that Boeing's own departure has effectively sealed shut. No amount of rebranding fixes a number that's already indexed on Google. And the Netflix parallel closes the whole loop. But let's really sit in it for a moment, because the details matter more than the headline. In August 2025, Netflix didn't just renew a content deal. They expanded into As Ever, pulled Meghan's lifestyle brand deeper into the partnership, committed to a larger product line, and packaged the whole thing as an extended creative future. That's not a passive renewal. That's an active doubling down. Someone at Netflix looked at the data available in August 2025 and decided this was worth more investment, not less. 7 months later, they were distributing unsold inventory to their own staff, truckloads, internally, because there was no commercial market left to absorb it. The sequence is identical to Boeing: public commitment, expanded investment, quiet, total exit. No meaningful public explanation from either side. And that detail, the silence, matters enormously. These are not small organizations that go quiet because they lack a communications department. Boeing has an entire global PR infrastructure. Netflix has one of the most sophisticated media machines on the planet. When corporations of this size exit without explanation, the silence is itself a strategy. Legal has signed off on saying nothing. That's a calculated decision, not an oversight. When two of the largest corporations on the planet run the identical exit sequence on the same brand within the same 1-8-month window, that's not bad luck. That's not timing. That's not the market. That's due diligence arriving at the same conclusion from two completely different industries, two completely different boardrooms, two completely different risk frameworks. Same conclusion, different industry, same brand, same exit. So here's the verdict, not a recap. The verdict. And it matters that you hear it as a verdict, not a summary, because a summary is just events lined up in order. A verdict is what those events mean when you put them together and stop looking away. Boeing said long-term and left after one edition. Netflix expanded the deal and walked 7 months later. 43 corporate partners who were in Vancouver are nowhere near Birmingham. Qualified event professionals, people who get paid specifically to build things at this scale, are turning down paying work to keep their own names clean. The vice chairman of the board, a decorated legal expert who literally built the Armed Forces Covenant from the ground up, resigned without a single public word. And the two people who raised the alarm internally, who went through the proper channels, who did exactly what you're supposed to do when something is wrong, replaced. Before anyone outside the organization ever heard what they said, every single one of those decisions was made by someone with something real to lose. And that's the part that makes this different from opinion, different from commentary, different from a hot take with a royal thumbnail. Boeing has active military contracts across NATO countries to protect. Netflix had 9 figures on the table. Event professionals have careers built on their professional reputations, on the projects their names are attached to, on the industry relationships they've spent years cultivating. Melanie Pool has an OBE, a Florence Nightingale Foundation chairmanship, and 30 years of institutional credibility in veterans' welfare behind her name. And every single one of them looked at this brand and made the same call. Walking away was safer than staying. That is not sentiment. That is not tabloid gossip. That is a market verdict delivered simultaneously by a defense contractor, a streaming giant, an events industry, and a governance professional, all independently, all quietly, all in the same direction. Now, the Sussexes team called Bauer's book deranged conspiracy and melodrama, and they're entitled to say that. But here's what's interesting, not that they said it, but what they chose not to address when they said it. They didn't produce the full, unredacted Vancouver budget that Rachel Maxwell has already filed Freedom of Information requests to obtain. They didn't explain why 43 sponsors from Vancouver aren't at Birmingham. They didn't address why the vice chairman resigned the same week Boeing's exit was confirmed. They didn't explain what convinced a company that publicly committed to the long-term future of this foundation that one edition was enough. They didn't address the $118,000 per competitor figure. They didn't address the US Warrior Games running on $2 million a year by comparison. They didn't address the Netflix inventory distribution. They attacked the author. They left every single document untouched. And that tells you more about which part of this story they're actually worried about than any statement ever could. Because if the documents were clean, the documents would be the response. They're not the response. The author is the response. That's the tell. Tom Bauer's previous subjects did the same thing, and it's worth remembering how that went. Robert Maxwell didn't dispute the reporting he bought up the publishing rights to physically block the paperback edition from reaching readers. Mohammed Al-Fayed didn't engage with the substance. He dismissed the reporting publicly for years, right up until a BBC documentary confirmed what Bauer had already written. Tony Blair, Boris Johnson, Jeremy Corbyn, Conrad Black, Richard Branson, Bernie Ecclestone, Simon Cowell, 24 best-selling books. The pattern is always the same. The subject attacks the messenger. The documents surface anyway. History lands on Bauer's side every single time. And the Sussexes know that pattern, which is exactly why a spokesperson was firing out statements within 24 hours of the book landing, not because the book is deranged, because the book has a track record behind it that they understand better than anyone. So here's what we're actually looking at when we zoom all the way out. A veteran athletic competition founded on genuinely noble principles, built to celebrate the resilience of wounded service members, backed initially by serious corporate and institutional credibility, is now 11 sponsors deep against a £45 million projected cost. It cannot fill key operational roles because industry professionals are protecting their own names. It lost its co-presenting sponsor after one edition despite a public long-term commitment. It lost its streaming partner 7 months after an expansion. Its vice chairman left quietly the same week its anchor sponsor walked. And the two people who tried to fix it from the inside were shown the door before the outside world ever heard what they had to say. That trajectory doesn't reverse with a press release. It doesn't reverse with a new spokesperson or a softer Instagram caption or another lifestyle brand pivot. It reverses with transparency, full budget disclosure, unredacted documents, real answers to the questions that Boeing's risk department, Netflix's due diligence team, Melanie Pool, and 2 Canadian executives have all already asked in their own way. And so far, transparency is the one thing that hasn't shown up. The veterans this competition was built to serve deserve better than a funding gap, a bankrupt host city, and a sponsor board that's mostly empty. That's not a political statement. That's not a royal take. That's just what the numbers say when you read them straight. So here's my question for the comments, and I want a real theory. Not a cheer, not a jersey number, a genuine theory. Boeing called this a long-term partnership in 2023. Their corporate lawyers cleared that language. Their government relations team understood exactly what the Invictus brand meant to their military contracts across NATO. They knew precisely what they were signing. And then they looked at Birmingham 2027 and said, no, cleanly, quietly, without public explanation. What do you think Boeing's risk department actually found in those redacted budget documents, in those internal assessments, in whatever due diligence a defense contractor runs before walking away from a veteran charity they publicly called a long-term commitment that made the exit this clean and this quiet? When a company with active military contracts across multiple NATO countries decides a veteran charity has become too much of a liability to sponsor, something specific changed. Something in the numbers. Something behind the figures that are still, right now, sitting behind black bars in documents that haven't been released. What do you think is hiding in the part they won't show us? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one, and the best theories are going to shape the next video on this because this story is not finished. Not even close. If this breakdown gave you something real to think about, hit that like button. It genuinely helps this reach people who need to see it. Share it with someone who's been following this story and hasn't seen the full financial picture yet. Subscribe so you're there when the next layer of this comes out, because with FOI requests still pending and Birmingham 2027 still a year away, there is a lot more coming. See you in the next one.